Dear brothers, we are going to broach a touchy subject for most people today, although it shouldn't be, which is politics. And really, for that matter, social affairs as well. This isn't going to be a conversation about me telling you who to vote for, or the problems and ills of social groups, or why Democrats or Republicans or Libertarians are the better options or worse options. The internet is chock full of all of that. You could go find somebody on Instagram right now and go down this whole rabbit hole of what they believe and all of that. And then you end up following them, and we're really just at groupthink in its finest form. A bunch of people falling into a line, not because they're convicted of their values completely, but because we like to pick sides. You want to feel like you belong somewhere, and often this falls under political lines. So I want to address the real issue that we need to assess as men. The issue of why and how we make those political and social decisions, and where, in my opinion, that should really all stem from in the first place. And the answer is really nothing crazy. It's pretty simple. Universal principles, or another way of saying it that I like is moral law. So this is a kind of law that is impartial, impersonal, objective, self-evident, as our founding fathers so aptly put into our Declaration of Independence. It's a divine law outside of humans. So let me first talk a little bit about what moral law isn't. And a lot of this wisdom I've pulled from many intelligent men, but the one who comes to mind the most, who most of you have probably read at some point, is Stephen Covey. So he wrote The 7 Habits of Highly Effective People, and has had a huge influence in the business world and beyond. But he actually has quite a lot more writings on these kind of topics, which I'm going to kind of use to start our conversation today. So one of his true north tenets, as he calls them, are the fact that values are not principles. So values can change. What we value can be impacted by a bunch of external factors and our emotions as a whole. Anyone can be driven by values, but that doesn't mean that those values are ethical or principle-centered. What most people mean when they are retorting their values to the world is that these are the things that they believe today which are going to benefit them the most. It's more of a selfish system. Their values are amoebas. They're just morphing and molding to the next set of circumstances and beliefs, which basically keep them fat, happy, and kind of safe. So Covey writes about these values, and he says this: I've observed that if people never get centered on principles at some time in their lives, they will take the expedient political social path to success and let their ethics be defined by the situation. They will say business is business, meaning they play the game by their own rules. They may even rationalize major transgressions in the name of business in spite of having a lofty mission statement. End quote. He argues that even Hitler and Saddam Hussein had values, but is what they valued principled? Is it principled to starve millions of people like Mao? Is it principled to nearly exterminate an entire race of people like Hitler? Is it principled to say one thing to someone's face and do another behind their backs? Is it principled to make someone smaller so that you can be taller and gain favor in your business? Most people's values are nothing but their personal commandments, which are written down in pencil, and they can be changed at a moment's notice, so that you may continue to pursue your own vision of how life should be, or at least how life should benefit you. If you are only ever making decisions that are expedient to your concept of progress, how can you even get through the world effectively? You're more like a child constantly playing different roles in your head so that you always come out on top. you're more of an estranged creature than a man. There are a few men who pondered these ideas better or more fervently than C.S. Lewis, one of my favorites. Through his various works of fiction and nonfiction, he talks about how when you put social affairs and politics first, you're just putting the cart before the horse, and eventually you're just going to crash over the mountain. So if you don't have any moral objectivity to base decisions off of, you start creating moral subjectivity. And eventually that really turns into some kind of nihilism where nothing means nothing. And you can simply make up the rules as you play the game because there's nothing that you're basing anything off of. Moral subjectivity is what allows serial killers to murder uncontrollably. It allows tyrants to rise up and place millions of people under their boot. It allows businessmen to cheat on their spouses with the secretary. It allows men to abandon their children. It allows men to explain away their alcohol addiction. It allows men to find no fault in the black eyes and bloody nose of the wife that they beat consistently. The most dangerous man in the world is the one without a compass. This kind of man, they can change their mind at any time. They're untethered by principles and can thus just cause destruction one day, act like a saint the next day, and then find their way to another city which they can burn down. All the while, when they look at themselves in the mirror, they're gloating about how righteous they are. Without a moral law to follow, you're going to leave chaos in your wake. Without principles, you're making decisions with your emotions and your whims and your fantasies. This is not what we should be doing. Aristotle talks about the good, and which is essentially you becoming the highest version of yourself as a human, guided by principles that are timeless and ordained by a higher power, by God himself. Honesty, humility, courage, perseverance, piety, love, kindness, hard work and effort, justice. Just look across history and you'll see what happens when the opposite of moral law occurs. Just look at the mob mentality and rule of pretty much every communist dictator across time. Millions of human beings have been laid to slaughter because of a lack of principles. How do you get to that point, though? It's really as easy as this. That lack of moral law starts by taking the first step, which is ignoring that it exists in the first place. Once you've ignored it, you start that road of destruction. And it's a road I find we're on in the US today. We have bucked the self-evident truths that our founding fathers understood so deeply. They were godly men, but they were also mortal men, pulled here and there by whims and emotions and fancies, just like we are today. And in knowing this, they pieced together our Constitution under those divine laws, those universal principles of God, because they knew what human hearts do when they're not tethered to principles. The effect is destruction. So I ask all of you guys this morning, how do you pick your politicians? How do you select your social groups? How do you do business? How do you find a worthy wife? How do you find good friends? What helps you guide those decisions? Instagram influencers, news anchors, the professor or college that told you what the better political party was? Are you that easily swayed that any mob can simply push you in a certain direction of their choice? I've probably rambled long enough today. Let me leave you guys with this. To have a keen understanding as to why you like or do not like or support or do not support a certain group or politician, you must have a clear sense of what your moral foundations are, what your principles are. If you're a crappy human being pulled in there by the fancies of the world, what makes you think that you can make an educated decision on leadership? You barely have control of your own life. How on earth could you choose a leader or a social group to join? More than that, what makes you think that you can discern what is good from one group or the other? What compass are you using to examine this? We live in such a polarized world today that people's opinions have no principles. They're more tribal than anything else. It's what tribe do I belong to? Where does my allegiance lie? But not does my allegiance lie where my principles are. I encourage all of you, examine your principles today. Write them down. What do you stand for? What do you believe? Do you even have a clue what you believe? That's a good thing to write down. Otherwise, you're just a puppet being told what to do by the mob. When you realize this, it's really high time that all of us start seeking out that universal law. The Bible, great place to start. The writings of C.S. Lewis, Tolkien, St. Augustine, Plato, Dostoevsky, Socrates, the Stoics. Even better, go find the opposite of all of that and prove to yourself the merit of moral law. Don't just take my word for it. I can remember feeling very unprincipled, no guiding principles. I had disagreed with all of it. And then eventually I found, wow, this really sucks and my life isn't going where I want it to go. And then you look at history and you look at our world and you go, wow, the more unprincipled we become, the worse everyone's lives get. Guys, once we can do this, when we can set up this idea of moral law in our heads, which by the way is not easy, don't get me wrong. But once we can do this, you're going to see the world flourish. As always, God bless, be strong, let's get after it, boys.